White space and comments are two aspects of programming that you need to be aware of, especially how they function in your particular programming environment. So let's talk about white space and comments in the C++ world. Now, white space refers to, and this is very complex, right? That white space you see on your page, it's blank spaces between words, it's tabs that cause things to be indented, it's new line characters that you don't see but cause us to start on a new line, it's form feed characters that do this very similar functionality, and then it can be comments. And so let's talk about how we can use white space and comments in C++. Now, when we're talking about white space in C++, very similar to a lot of other programming languages, there must be at least one white space character between keywords, commands, and so forth. Otherwise, the compiler can't figure out where one bit of instruction stops and the next one starts. So keep that in mind. Now, all other white space characters get ignored, and we can do some cool things with that. Notice right here, I'm creating an integer named dog, and this just tells me it's the end of the line, the semicolon. But I put int, that's telling the compiler this is going to be an integer variable, one white space, or just one blank space, that is white space there, and then dog. It can easily see that there's two words and it knows what to do with these. Now I can just as easily have indented a little bit for whatever reason to make it more readable or for a certain style or whatever. And then I could have put more than one space between the data type integer and then the variable name dog. Wouldn't bother anybody, wouldn't upset the compiler, everything would be fine. And then when we're talking about arithmetic functions like the equal sign, the plus sign, the minus sign, we can scrunch them all up. We don't need any white space, but if it makes it easier for us to read, for readability purposes, we can add some white space between our arithmetic symbols. Not a problem, any of those will work. So as it turns out, we generally use white space to help us kind of pretty up the code and make it easier to read. Now, comments. Comments is a way for us to input our opinion, our remarks, and our explanations into our code. Now, these are ignored by the compiler. This is kind of like being the average worker that most of us are, right? We're free to give our opinion, remarks, and explanations, and the management, right, they just ignore it. Same thing here. So anytime I'm coding and I'm doing something that's a little bit complex, or I know that when I come back to look at this code in a few months I could get confused here, I can write myself some little notes in here. Now there are two types of comments in C++, and really if you've ever worked in any C language you've already seen these. The first one is the single line comment, and it is simply two slashes, two forward slashes, just like you see right here. And then we can do multiple lines, and it starts with a forward slash and an asterisk, and we stay in comment mode until we see an asterisk followed by a forward slash. So this opens the comment and this closes the comment. Let's look at some quick examples here, and you're going to see these when we actually jump out into the coding environment and write some coded examples up. First of all, with a single line comment, anything that follows those two slashes all the way to the end of the line is treated by the compiler as a comment. In other words, okay, the first part of the line is code, I'll compile that, I'll run it, I'll do stuff with it. Everything past those two slashes, I'm just going to ignore it. Good example. We're creating an integer here called age in our veterinarian's program, int space age. Close it out, put our two comments, everything from the slashes. We don't put two comments, we put two slashes. Everything from there to the end of the line to where we start a new line is treated as a comment. And we've left ourselves a little note here that this integer age is going to hold the animal's age in months, because think about this, people are bringing puppies in and we say, how old is it? 4. Well, it's probably not a 4-year-old puppy, but it could be 4-month-old puppy. So if they bring in a 3-year-old dog, that's a 36-month-old dog. So anyway, that's just one of the oddities about being a veterinarian that might be out there. I don't know if that's for real or not, but boy, it sure sounds good, right? Now let's talk about a multi-line comment or a multiple line comment. And this is where everything between that opening forward slash and asterisk and everything between the asterisk and the closing forward slash is a comment. And this can get somewhat creative. You'll notice here in our code we would put a forward slash, an asterisk, go to the next line, and just type a little message to ourselves. The following code reads and writes to the database. We went to the next line and we closed it out. So all of this information from here all the way down to here, all of this is a comment. So you obviously here you can read some leave some pretty copious notes to yourself inside your code. Now, comments is a way you're going to get beat up. Other nerds will beat you up for either writing too many comments or not putting enough comments. Don't worry about it. Just do what works for you. If I were you, I would err to the side of leaving too many comments. That way when you come back to work on your code a few months later, you can figure out what's going on. Now, you can get pretty creative with this, and I'll just show you an example here. You will see these kind of comments out there a lot of times. And notice that this, in the strictest sense, complies completely. You have a forward slash and an asterisk. We just put another asterisk, another row of asterisks out here, one after another, to make this capture our attention and to break it off from everything else. We put our message, the following code reads and writes to the database. We put another string of asterisks, and then notice this last asterisk and the forward slash satisfies our closing. And so this is a multi-line comment block, and you'll see these all over the place. But that's just kind of some basics on white space and using comments in C++. Statement blocks are a functionality in a lot of different programming languages, and also here in C++, that you need to be aware of, and you need to understand the function that these things provide. Now, a statement block simply designates a number of lines of code as related to each other. And there's a lot of different ways that this affects our programs, and we'll talk about them as we go through the course and do some examples. But I kind of wanted to call it out here in a separate video so that it makes sense to you and to get your attention with it. So the bottom line is that statements between braces are what's called a statement block. And braces are these curly Q kinds of things that you see right here, a left brace and a right brace. All right. Now, if we look at some very simple sample code, this is the main function that I used in a previous video on the veterinarians example. But you'll notice that we have our function main here, and then we start with a brace here, and then we end with a brace here. Now, what this is telling us is that everything between these two braces, starting here and going down to here, these are all related, okay? They are a block of code. Now, you'll also hear this called a compound statement. So if you want to impress some people, especially the relatives, you can talk about writing a compound statement this afternoon in C++, right? But anyway, a compound statement just simply means it's a block of statements. Now, blocks can also be nested within other blocks. So, for example, under here, let's say somewhere around this bill function that we called outside, I could have put another function in here and had an open and close block, and this area in here would be treated separate from the rest of this out here. You will see this quite a bit, and I'll point that out as we do some examples later, so just keep that in mind. But here's the real deal. Blocks tell the compiler that the lines of code inside those blocks have some sort of relationship to each other, and often they establish the scope of the variables and the functionalities within that block. Now, I don't want to go too deep into that right now about scope. We'll talk about that later. We're not talking about a mouthwash here. We're generally talking about especially our variables and determining what parts of the program do we want that variable to be available to. And what we're trying to do here is manage memory and manage efficiency with our program, okay? So for now, let's just leave it at this. Statement blocks in C++ are braces, and we can nest blocks inside other blocks, and this is going to give the compiler some hints about how our program should behave. And we will dig into this a little bit more as we work through some of the examples. Now let's actually dig into looking at some very simple examples of writing some C++ programs. Now I want to go over one thing here. I started to make this a three-part video, but I thought that might get kind of cumbersome, especially when you're trying to come back and use this as a reference. You wouldn't see the titles. So I'm actually going to break this up into 3 separate videos. But we're going to talk about really the 2 options, and really there's 3, but I don't want to go too far with this. But the 2 main options that you have when you're writing C++ programs. And then when you add that into the Bill Gates world with Visual Studio and that whole Visual C++ Express world, you have a lot more options. And so rather than confuse you, I'm just going to kind of show you some of these as we go through here. But your 2 main options anytime you're writing C++ is that you can write with the ISO IEC version of C++, which means, I already mentioned this in a couple of other places in the course, so I'm just going to review it quickly here, just so you'll know that I realize I'm repeating myself. This will compile to native code, all right? Most of the examples in this course are going to be ISO/IEC C++ code, because that's what you're trying to learn here is the C++ code. And I want to really dig into that stuff. But we will write them as console applications in the Visual C++. Now, this is something I wrestled with. Do I want to use this Microsoft Visual C++ Express tool? And in the end, I decided yes, because it's freely available. It's very popular. You'll see it everywhere. Now, C++ nerds, or like any other nerds, you're going to meet people that when you mention the Microsoft coding environment, Visual C++, they're going to start throwing furniture and screaming and ranting and raving. And you have to call the nice men in the white suits to come help them out. All right? But still, that's a very popular platform. It's very easy to get it. We don't have to get into a lot of nerd issues on releases and so forth. We still have nerd issues, but you've always got nerd issues in IT, okay? But to make it easy for everybody, that's what we're going to do here. Now, the other version, and this is kind of cool, is in the Visual C++ Express environment that we're going to be working in, we can also write C++/CLI. That simply means C++ code that's being managed by the Common Language Runtime Environment, Microsoft .NET Framework, and all that stuff, all right? Now, there is a third option that I really don't want to count, but I got to mention it here, and that is Windows-based C++ applications. In other words, we're going to write a Windows application, and we're going to use the C++ language to do it. And I may even throw a quick example in here to let you see it and see how different it looks, just so that you'll know what you're looking at when you see one out there or when you try to write them yourself. But understand that Windows adds its own complexities to the programming environment and world and management and memory management and so forth. So we don't want to wander into that in this course. It's going to really be outside the scope. We want to concentrate on the C++ language and get you comfortable with, when you look at it, understanding what all these asterisk and weird symbols and all this stuff that's going on. It looks like hieroglyphics when compared to other languages. All right, so with that, let's go take a look at the next 2 or 3 videos, just some simple examples to help you understand, first of all, how to manipulate Visual C++ Express to get the actual code that you want, the program that you want out of it, and then look at some minor differences. And I want to talk about some tweaks and some gotchas to help you along. Now, in this video, I want to write just a very, very simple standard ISO IEC C++ example program using Visual C++ Express. Actually, it's Visual 2010. So what I'm going to do is click on Start, and then I'll just open Microsoft Visual C++ 2010 Express, and I'll just let it open up, and there it is, and we're just going to create a new project. Now, understand, in Visual C++, I've already mentioned this, you have a lot of options, a lot of things that can happen. We're going to create a Win32 console application. I'm going to put a name on it here, and I'm just going to call it VTC Win32 console EX, for example. All right, so there's a nice long hard to remember name, so that should work for most anything in IT. And then I will hit OK, and then it opens the application wizard, and notice it's telling me that there's some settings, console application. I'm going to click next, not finish, because I don't want pre-compiled headers. I just want an empty project. I want a blank slate that I can work with. I would strongly encourage you to go through and play with these different things and see what you end up with. but for now we'll just click Finish. And then the environment will open up. Now we could easily sit here the rest of the day and wonder, wait a minute, nothing's happening, what's going on? Well, if I will open Solution Explorer, just click on that, you will see that it has indeed set my files up for me, but there's not a whole lot here. So what I'll do is left click on Source Files, then right click, and I'll add a new item, and I will add a C++ file. Then I need to name that, okay, and we'll just call it VTC console example. And then I will click Add, and you will notice that if I look in the Solution Explorer, it added it out here. Now let me show you one thing that will be kind of a gotcha sometimes, and it could be a problem for you. When you're trying to write just standard native C++, go to the project and come down to the properties on the project, come out to the property pages, click on configuration, and notice it says use Unicode character set. Set that to not set. Alright, click apply and then click OK. But we don't want to use Unicode here, we're just trying to use standard native straight clean C++. Alright, and I'm skipping some things here, but I don't want to make it overly complicated. Alright, so let's just write a few lines here. Let's start off with an include statement. Let's include the IO stream. Alright, and this allows us to stream things in and out to the console. And then we will open with our famous integer main. This is telling us that we're creating the main function here. And it's really hard to type and talk, but we're creating the main function here, and it's going to return an integer when it has completed running. And so what we're going to do is put a pretty simple thing in here, std : COUT, and you can see that IntelliSense is finding these for us, even though I'm not using it a whole lot. Understand one thing here, a little reminder, this is a namespace deal with the 2 colons here. Standard is the namespace, 2 colons, and then cout or console out is what we're going to use, and then we'll put our 2 left arrows here. We'll talk about those a little bit later on and what they do. It's pretty obvious what they do. This is a simple hello world from VTC. That's corny enough for a simple example, and we will close that literal statement out. We will put another set of our symbols there, and we'll put std, and that is namespace again, and we'll put end line. That's telling it that we're done here. Then we'll close our line out. We'll drop down, and we'll tell it to return a 0 back out to the operating system, basically saying everything is okay. Alright, now we'll talk about a lot of things are going to go on here that I'm not going to mention. We'll come back to them a little bit later, and we'll cover these things. But for now, just know that we are going to send this information out to the console when our program runs. So what we need to do is come up here and just simply start debugging. Click here, and notice it says the project is out of date, and would you like to build it? And we can say yes. We can say don't show this dialog again. I'll leave it alone for now. You'll notice at the bottom on the output window, we're seeing what's happened. And if you saw the black box pop up here and go away, the program ran, and it looks like it was okay. Notice native, the console execution native has exited with code 0. That means it looks like it ran okay, but how can we see it? Well, I'm going to show you a trick, and it's kind of a neat thing in Windows 7 if you're running Windows 7. I'm going to go actually find the executable and run it. There's an easy way to do that. I'll click on my little documents folder down here on the taskbar. I can just as easily go to the C drive and chase it down through the users. But if you'll open it off of the taskbar, the start bar down here in Windows 7, you can see the libraries folder. And then if I go into documents, I will actually be able to see Visual Studio 2010. And if I go into that, you will see projects. Now, any projects that you've built in Visual Studio will be in here. And I cleared mine out so as not to confuse you. But notice if I go in here, this thing was actually built. My executable, notice, is in that debug folder. Well, I'm going to back up one time, hold down the Shift key, and then right click on that debug folder and say open command window here. Left click. And then I can just do a quick directory dir, and I can see my executable. And so I'll just type it out. VTC Win32 console EX, press enter, and notice there's my line. You have to look for it here. This is a simple hello world from VTC. So our program ran. That's a very simple example of a native C++ program written in Visual Studio 2010 C++ Express.